Get started. I'm Scott Hensley. I cover the pharmaceutical industry for the Wall Street Journal. I also write a column every other week for WSJ.com about healthcare issues. And I spend so much time hammering on people about disclosure and potential conflict of interest that I don't think I can go any further without saying that the Wall Street Journal, of course, would love all your advertising. Now, I have nothing to do with that. In fact, I think our group sometimes thinks that we're probably the biggest barrier to that happening, but that's an arm's length thing, and I had to look through the attendees to even see who was here from my own company. So I would like to have questions from the audience, and I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative if they drag on. I almost did then, but we'll start now with my own question, and I wanted to begin with a general one. But in case you haven't seen the bios, I will say that the way we have this is the kind of the pros on this side and the cons over there. And joining Ralph and Pat Kelly are on the con side are Steve Scheller, who's a lawyer from Philadelphia from the firm of Scheller, Ludwig and Beatty, and he spends a great deal of his time in class action suits representing consumers in litigation against companies that have made products that he says because of adverse reactions have hurt the consumers. And so he's going to talk about that and how DTC fits in with it. John Swayze, who you're going to hear from later in the meeting, is a professor of marketing at American University and has worked with the FDA on their analysis of DTC ads. We have Stuart Klein on this side, who I think many of you probably know is president of the Quantum Group, an advertising agency. Pat, you know. And then nearest to me is Jim Davidson, who runs a policy advocacy company that he founded in Washington, and he's a former Senate staffer who worked on the Freedom of Information Act rules and has some thoughts about freedom of speech and rights to information. My general question would be to both panels. Given what we've heard today and what's come out in study after study, what is the right way to evaluate DTC advertising or healthcare information, and whether it's educational or misleading, and what are the proper standards for that kind of judgment? Maybe we'll start with the cons, and I'll throw that open to anyone over there who wants to volunteer. Steve, Ralph?
Sure, I'm always interested in starting. The problem with evaluating DTC advertising now, and I don't like to paint the entire industry with a broad brush that you're all bad guys, but I also don't want you to think that you're like I'm only talking about a bad apple in the barrel. I'm talking about a lot of bad apples in the barrel. And the problem in evaluating the DTC advertising that is out there is you don't really have a way of communicating the true risks and benefits of the products you're advertising. And that's a major concern. For example, we just had one the other day with Prempro, where the New England Journal released in advance a May article where they proceeded to announce that they're letting this article out now because Prempro really has no real benefits at all. Other than for minuscule, for immediate problems related to menopause. And, for the millions of women who've been taking it long term, it causes severe adverse events. And there's a long litany of things like that that should have been known. You wonder what was known by the drug company involved. And we have a long litany of problems with pharmaceuticals from Pfizer's product like Trovan, Resolin, and I don't mean to criticize Pfizer because I happen to think they're one of the more reputable companies. I want to say Mr. Kelly and the company of Pfizer has done a reasonable job of trying to resolve these issues, contrary to some of the others that are represented here, and I commend them for that, so I don't want to get into this.
So, Steve, short of seeing the companies in the courtroom, what's the right standard to judge whether the advertising is misleading or good?
The right standard to judge them is to really get all the information out there through some independent entity that is really reviewing it, and the FDA is not that entity right now, unfortunately.
Okay.
And until we get proper standards. Right now, Ralph Nader's group, Public Citizen, does a lot, Sid Wolf. But it usually comes up with the population being tested in the field, and the advertisement comes on the front end of a new product, where you're really testing it on people. And why did it take so long to learn about Prempro? It wasn't a drug company expenditure. Why did it take so long to learn about diet drugs and fen-phen and Redux? And this is one drug after another. I'm not talking about isolated instances here.
Okay. Jim Davidson, you want to take a crack at the
I would like to take
standard?
a crack at that. Thanks very much. One of the things that I think that misses, Steve, and with all due respect, I think that it's unrealistic to think that a private entity or some sort of nonprofit or even government agencies are going to spend the time and resources delivering this kind of information to the public on a scale that it's going to be beneficial. I mean, if you look at the history of commercial speech protection in this country, and a good friend of Ralph's and mine, Alan Morrison, actually tried one of the first main cases, the Virginia pharmacy case. And that case has led to 27 years of expanded protection of commercial speech in this country. One of the things that resonates through every decision is the Supreme Court's concern about getting information in the hands of the public. The court says that this information isn't always going to be perfect, but the answer to less perfect information is more information. Get it out there into the marketplace and let the information compete. This is the heart of why the National Medical Association survey is so important to the benefits of direct-to-consumer advertising. Their physicians said over and over, this advertising is reaching people that otherwise are in population groups that will not be reached, and are learning about conditions so they can ask questions of somebody, a health professional.
Nobody has the answers because the information is being hidden by information which is often in the hands of the pharmaceutical company. They fight the FDA. The FDA, if they can't beat the FDA to give the FDA tries to get the information, then what they do is they put their own people into the FDA. For example, there's an article in the March 24th issue of U.S. News about the present chief counsel for the FDA, Mr. David Troy. It's sort of, again, an example of the wolves watching the hens. And enforcement of advertising standards, has dropped 2/3 under his jurisdiction, under his watch. So what I'm saying to you is there is nobody there to give the public the true information the way it is now. There are volunteer groups, Public Citizen, lawyers like me that have to literally beat down courtroom doors while you guys do everything in your power to burn the hard drive, if you know what I mean. And like those famous emails that we fight like crazy to get in the litigation. I'm saying to you that there is a problem, and the problem is hedonism versus hedonism. And what I think you guys ought to get about doing as drug companies is develop a pill to diminish your greed impulses. And then once that's done, we get some honesty and integrity and justice in the business. Now, I say it's not true of all of you, but I think you need to get about moving on that pill real quick, because I'm tired of seeing so many kids on Paxil and Adderall, and they're selling Adderall in the schools. They sniff it, the kids. And it's terrible what's going on out on the street with all these drugs, and it's coming from legal channels. And I think something's got to change. Not sure how to do it myself, but I do my best. As you know, I take on the tobacco industry, and I was part of that $10 billion verdict last Friday in Madison County, Illinois. I commend the 51-page decision to you. You'll learn something about light cigarettes being one of the biggest scams around. And I say to you, this has got to change. Now, I don't know the answers, but I can point out the issues.
Let me ask a question to Stuart Klein on this side, which is, I think a lot of things that we heard this afternoon, and part of what Steve might be saying too, is how effective are current methods for communicating risk and some of the issues around the medicine to consumers? What works, what doesn't? Is there a way to improve the way that it's being done?
I think the answer to both questions is yes. study after study that's out there, and Pat pointed out a number of them, show that the risk information that's communicated in DTC ads is at least as effectively communicated, in many cases more effectively communicated than the benefit information. From our own research that we do in the advertising we create, we see that proper communication of risk information actually improves the credibility of the advertising. It makes it more believable. When consumers are presented with both sides of a story, it's human nature to actually believe that information. And when we deal with the regulatory bodies that we deal with, I've been in industries from consumer goods to airlines to financial services. There is no industry that is even close to the regulation that this industry suffers under. We are constantly dealing with issues where we go in, we negotiate, we come back with revisions, the revisions are put into the market. 3 months later, we're told that those revisions are no longer good enough. It's a process that is endless. And my firm belief is that the information that we put out there very effectively communicates those risks and therefore results in more effective, more informed consumers when it's all done.
John, what is the research showing? I was going to try John, and then could we get you?
First, can I correct your introduction?
Yes.
I may be sitting on the far left, but when I was recruited for this panel, I was recruited to be the academic and somewhat neutral.
Okay. Can we move him over here in the middle?
So, and the reason I was
myself neutral too.
I work with the folks at FDA, and I'm happy to work with such folks. Let me try to answer your question, and I don't have a dog in this fight. I really don't. I think this issue of how effectively it's communicating is a real issue, and I think today Pat presented a strong case for some of the benefits, but there are concerns. I mean, let's be candid about it. In our physician survey, 65% of them agree or strongly agree that DTC confuses the relative risks and benefits. I'm not saying that's a damning of the entire issue, but it is a concern. 75% think that drugs, that it makes consumers think that it works better than they really do. In our consumer surveys, I think there's concerns also about whether or not they're getting enough risk information in this balance. So I think I mean, I'm not speaking for the FDA, and let's make that clear from the table. I'm speaking for just me, who works with some of the research on this. So, but I think it's a real concern.
And I absolutely, I mean, you cannot argue with the statistics, but 88% of people walking into their doctor's office, understanding that the drug they're talking about is for the condition, the correct condition, there is something that's working here. But I also, you know, in answering the second half of the question, I do believe that there are ways that this process can work better. A lot of the information, a lot of the wording that we're required to put in is clearly not consumer-friendly language. That, I think, is one of the #1 issues that we as an industry, and Pat referred to this earlier, we need to work on driving the way we communicate these issues down to a level that can be understood by a greater percentage of the people who we're talking to. Because right now, there are too many people who do not have the education levels necessary to understand the language that we're being forced to use.
Ralph?
I think that central to the criticism is exaggerating benefits and minimizing risks. So the question is, what do you do about it? The FDA's one response. I think the state and local consumer enforcement agencies could take a bigger interest in this, and that certainly will enhance the enforcement capacity. I think also the Advertising Review Board of the industry itself, National Association of Advertising Agencies, which puts out opinion letters on deceptive ads that are sent to it by anybody. It's out of New York. They've had some pretty withering criticism of ads in other areas of the economy. And just the possibility that a company may be criticized by the Advertising Review Board has a good deterrent impact. But what's fascinating is that years ago, if you asked the drug companies, would they be willing to list side effects in a compressed ad, they would raise their hands in horror. And now they think it increases the credibility of the ad. But what I would like to find out more about is the deadening effect of thousands of ads every year talking about deadly side effects at the end of the ad. Has it lost its impact? Has it lost its cautionary impact? Do people absorb these risks, the description of risk, by simply saying, well, you know, that may happen to a few percentage of people, it's not going to happen to me. In other words, over a period of time, you get an asymptotic curve on the lessening impact of those warnings. It'd be interesting to see if there are any studies on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
I guess we should
Oh, I'm
warn
sorry.
less then? Would that be your recommendation? Is in order to ensure that it's fresh, we should stop warning as much as we do?
No, but it's to understand that you can be doing the right thing, but it has less and less effect, and you shouldn't tout the effect if it's having less and less effect. Just the deadening effect of it.
But we are doing the right
Warnings
thing.
on tobacco. You know, that doesn't seem to have diminished tobacco use that much. But one of the, and I hate to relate you to tobacco, most of you are not related to tobacco. Although in certain individual cases, I want to let you know they are in the same league, not Pfizer. No, don't confuse them, okay?
John, did you have something to add?
Yeah, let me just finish this
Sure.
point. I have no intention of putting you in the same category. But one thing to be in mind, I think one of the things that would be helpful is a monetary incentive to reducing adverse reactions, which is the major problem I'm worried about. And a monetary incentive, I think, that would be very useful. It's not just litigation by people like me. You know, in the long run, I would like to see that not have to happen. What I would like to see is a system in place where people who have adverse reactions to drugs that are not life-saving, that are, and you have to grade them, you know, and you might grade them from 1 to 5. Those adverse reactions have to have a compensation element in it to discourage the use of the drugs and to take more account of how to evaluate a patient to determine will they have an adverse reaction and will they be monitored carefully enough so that they can avoid having a serious adverse reaction, which is often what has happened here. The second thing I would recommend, and that's not done now at all in the drug industry, it needs to really be thought out. I'm not saying I have the perfect answer thought out. The second thing I think would be a very good thing to consider would be a philosophy of a whistleblower type thing where you have a patent on a drug. Now, and even if you don't have the patent, but it's over the counter, but another pharmaceutical company or another entity, like in class action law, if a class action is settled, but some other lawyer or plaintiff comes along and improves it by objecting or taking steps to improve it, additional fee compensation is added for that improvement. Now, I know the drug industry doesn't like to share their interests, but maybe one of the things that might be changed in the law is some type of incentive to those entities, whether they be pharmaceutical companies, independent agencies like Public Citizen or state agencies, that actually cause an improvement in notification of a new adverse reaction and the number and percentage. You know, the percentages are not talked about. Let's take Cipro, which I'm very familiar with.
I think we're going to have to move on to the next one. Okay. John, did you have something to add? Okay. I have a question, maybe it will dovetail with this, and that is, should we be looking at DTC ads in different categories? And some recent research was talking about what about in instances where there's a consensus about what to do for a condition versus one where there might not be. And maybe I'll ask Pat what you think about, you know, for instance, statins versus other categories where there might not be as much evidence out there to guide physicians or consumers on when to think about drug intervention.
Well, I think we have to start again. I know that it's not acceptable, it seems, to many of the panel members, but that again, we live in a regulated world. In fact, it is the most regulated world. And so the evidence that is available is that which the FDA, in their infinite or maybe not infinite wisdom, has decided to approve the drug as being safe and efficacious. And in fact, if there are drugs out there that Mr. Nader believes are still not efficacious, then the first people he should go talk to are the FDA, since they're the ones that make that decision. But I think that, again, it's hard for me to imagine how you build that consensus. I mean, who is the arbiter of that consensus? to a certain extent, what we are arguing here and what we've been arguing all along is that it is in this free marketplace of ideas where there is lots of information, is when you begin to build the only consensus that counts, which is what an individual physician thinks about the patient they are seeing in their exam room. That's the only consensus that I think really matters here, and that consensus is one that they have to be, I think, build off of the availability of all the information that can possibly be provided to them. I don't know how to make a kind of an arbitrary consensus from a third party that would ever be effective or appropriate in intervening in that particular physician-patient interaction.
Okay. Any comment from the other side?
Made enough comments.
I'd like to challenge Mr. Kelly about the tight regulation. I mean, when you have books full of drugs that have been sold again and again and again that aren't efficacious, the FDA is not doing its job. The FDA has been poor under both the Clinton and the Bush and Reagan administration. It seems to be getting worse and worse. And while the drug companies keep saying, you know, it's terribly rigid regulation, all kinds of bad things happen. Medical drugs, devices that are defective, that are harmful. You've got the horrendous situation where millions of women were used as guinea pigs on the hormone therapy, where there was constant assurance that this works and it's safe and it's okay, even though all those years there were contrary reports of some authority that that wasn't true. So if the FDA was really on its job, it would have done a lot of pain suppression through adequate regulation.
You have to be in the litigation area to see what I see. I see constant harassment by the drug company of the lower-end FDA examiners to put something down in the precautions section. You know, here's a book that doctors get every month. It's a shortened version of the PDR. And where they stick it and how finely in print, and they fight tooth and nail on not to have a black box or a warning, or put it in the adverse events, not causatively associated. I mean, the time that goes into that. They even had a party on the diet drug litigation when Redux didn't have to have a black box. I mean, okay? I wasn't invited, obviously, but I got the memos. But
Maybe next time.
You know, it wasn't my part, it was theirs. But the point I'm making to you is the FDA, there are some really good people at the FDA, and they are really depressed now. They need Paxil and Zoloft. Those things, because they are not allowed to do their job properly. And I think it's unfortunate. I think that greed pill is important. I think if we really get honesty and integrity and justice into the system and get away from hedonism into Edenism and do what drug companies really, what that gentleman out there says they're really doing, then we really will get about the right thing. But we've got to have a change of heart here, too.
Now that DTC is a little more mature, there are categories where consumers face many ads for competing products, and whether it's on the benefits or the risks, how are they making sense of these competing claims? Is it possible? Stuart, do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, I mean, it clearly depends on the category. In certain categories, there is, you know, the information that's presented to consumers is similar to the information that's presented to physicians. I think the statin category is one where there are certain drugs, a la Lipitor, who have very, very solid clinical efficacy evidence that's presented. And as a consumer, through research that we've seen, it's very clear that consumers distinguish between the efficacy levels of the drugs in that category. And if that is the reason that you are interested in pursuing statin therapy, if efficacy is your number one attribute you're seeking, it's very clear in that category that Lipitor is going to be your choice. I think in other categories where the differences between the drugs are much harder to understand, certainly from a consumer perspective, I think the choice then becomes more of a desire really to just go in and speak to the physician about the available options. We see category differences in people's desires to go in asking for a specific drug versus just talking about a drug or a class of drugs. And And I think, you know, the more competition there is out there in a specific class of drugs, the more the debate or the more the discussion with the doctor simply just becomes one of which is the best available choice for me.
And I would just
Sure.
underscore the fact that what Stuart just got to is the most important point, is whether there are competing claims that are confusing or illuminating to the consumer. In the end, it's the physician who's making the decision. Now, again, let's not forget that we are in a learned intermediary business. Now, again, several members of the panel have indicated that physicians belong at the same bottom of the barrel that they put us at. And so, again, I'm curious from Mr. Nader as to where we're going to go, since we can't trust the consumer, we can't trust the physician, and we can't trust the pharmaceutical company, can't trust the government, can't trust the regulators. Who do we trust?
It's not a matter of trust, it's a matter of verifying, huh? Somebody said that some years ago.
Yeah.
You have to verify. And if, Mr. Kelly, if you make sweeping generalizations like that in your own company, I really worry about your products. We're not talking that the FDA never does anything right, that all physicians don't know what they're doing when they're prescribed. We're talking about calibrated cautions here, where we know that the FDA is shorthanded, it's harassed by Congress, it's under heavy one-sided pressure, and it doesn't do the job that a reasonable citizen would expect it to do. And we know that there are a lot of doctors. For heaven's sake, there are 5% of the doctors who shouldn't even be practicing medicine. They're totally incompetent or otherwise incapacitated. And we know that your industry attacks at all ends of the continuum. You've had your detail men whining and dining and doing everything short of bribing doctors in various institutional settings, including our own office, to get them to accept highly emotional bases for prescribing your drug. I mean, it's too bad we can't just give you the reams of citations here, which you're probably familiar with, but there's no secret to what some of us here have been saying. Drugs are promoted emotionally. Your ad agencies make no bones about that. They're not promoted to the doctors as if they are members of a scientific profession. They're not held to that standard. Just look at the surveys of ads by drug companies in medical journals over the years.
Look at the the game begins with the initial trials. Somebody has to draft up the protocol. And boy, you should see the games that go on to draft a protocol that doesn't find anything adverse. And then the next step is to find people in the field to do the testing and get the patients in and give them 3-day cards for reporting adverse events and not bother to have them report as much as possible anything that's further out. I mean, the games that go on in some of the drug companies are mind-boggling and very disturbing to me that this goes on. And that's got to stop. So they start with the trials. They get to the FDA. They put a wolf in there to guard the hen house, and then they badger the heck out of the guys on the lower level who are trying to do the right job. Congress gets involved. Orrin Hatch, and he's jumping all over them.
Let's keep our eye on the ball here. 106,000 dead people in hospitals from adverse drug events. 2.2 million are injured every year. That is enough to keep our feet to the fire and be very concerned here. We don't want to be completely detoured into quibbling over certain ads here. We ought to start with the morbidity and mortality figures, and that's just in hospitals.
Yeah. And
that's right out of the JAMA.
Right.
That's right out of the medical profession itself.
Right. One thing I disagreed with him, did he commend the CDC? I have some real questions in my mind about CDC, big time. When you put those guys on your data safety monitoring boards and then take them to San Diego, for dinners and meetings and all kinds of goodies, and they have rights to patent interest, and they can set up maybe, I wonder if they're setting up family foundations. And then you have so-called senior groups that you contribute to. There was a big article in the February 2003 article of ARP, a big investigation of these groups that are supposedly independent. That's got to stop. The goal of the drug company is honesty and integrity and helping people get better from diseases. If we can't depend on you guys to do that, then we've got to I don't know what to say. You know, we've
Steve?
got to change that.
I think Jim has something to add here.
One of the things that, I mean, I heard you talk about the CDC, and I'd like to counter some of the statistics on morbidity that Ralph was saying, not to counter the statistics themselves, but to put this in the perspective of what the importance of information is in society. Certainly, I'm not going to argue with the morbidity levels of accidents or misdiagnosis. That's a serious issue and should be dealt with in its context. But what we're talking about here is the role of information and the competition of information in a society where we're trying to raise awareness levels. The Centers for Disease Control that you were just critiquing does do something on its website, and it does it very well in terms of alerting Americans to the natures of various conditions and diseases that are out there, trying to get their awareness level up so they can become more self-aware and seek help. If you look at just diabetes itself, there's 16 million Americans with diabetes. 6 million of them don't know that they have it. They haven't been to a physician to be diagnosed, and yet it can lead to very harmful later conditions. 43 million Americans have arthritis. It's the leading cause of disability in the country, and yet many cases are underdiagnosed or undiagnosed. And high blood pressure
is caused by vaccines, like the hepatitis A and the B vaccine and Lyme's.
How about high blood pressure? Not caused by vaccines. 50 million Americans. 50 million Americans have high blood pressure. 32% of them, 16 million Americans, don't know it. And yet, oftentimes, if someone's prompted by an ad to go see a physician, what happens is that physician then conducts a physical exam and finds other conditions that were looking there that could harm or kill that person. That's where information becomes really powerful.
Why don't they put more emphasis on that in their ads, Jim? Why don't they put more emphasis, as Bob Ehrlich said, if I remember you in your editorial in the magazine, why don't they shift more to disease awareness, compliance, and keeping with the prescription? Isn't that one of the big debates in this industry now?
And one of the earlier questions that was asked is, how do you evaluate DTC advertising? One of the ways that we evaluate DTC advertising is how many patients who were unaware that they previously had a condition are made aware of that condition in our advertising. That is one of the metrics we judge this by. It's a critical factor in why we do what we do. So it's happening already. Could it happen more? Absolutely, but it's happening.
You know, I'm not criticizing your group. I want you to understand that. I'm just trying to make sure you get the correct information. If I wanted to criticize much more, you know, I could be pretty wicked.
Let me ask a question here, which is, I think we accept that DTC ads and consumer information supported by the industry is here to stay. But how should it change? I mean, maybe we could take that question and then we'll open it up to the floor after that. Maybe I'll start with the pros. You've heard the gauntlet thrown down here. How should it change, and how do you think it will change? Maybe in the short term, and what do you see out in the far future? You want to try that, Pat?
Sure. Well, I think we've had a chance to discuss some of those changes, and they've been alluded to already. Is that I think that the concept of the fact that we should shift more of the investment into disease awareness, into high cholesterol, or into other activities of that sort, I think that concept springs from the fact that people don't understand the fact that we've already been doing that. And in fact, we've been the primary source of that activity since the beginning. So I think that it's difficult for me to say that that's a possible way for this to change.
Couldn't it be a change in the mix? I mean, it's true that you've done that, but its relative proportion is still small.
Absolutely. So I think, again, as I alluded to when I answered the question from the audience, is that we are already seeing that shift in our mix.
Okay.
Is that we are already undertaking much more aggressive approaches towards trying to solve the lingering compliance problem, towards trying to ensure that patients consumers, people, have access to all the information that they can possibly have around how to not only understand disease, understand treatments, but then also another issue that I think we could certainly work a lot on is how they can get reimbursement for all those activities too. Again, we've all been part of efforts to improve the healthcare insurance system in this country, and I think that we can play an even greater role at making sure consumers are aware of how they can get the help once they know they need the help.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and you know, one of the things that I haven't mentioned in doing that, you know, one of the problems you guys have in the drug industry is the Me Too drugs. Somebody comes out with a blockbuster, and everybody's got to get their Me Too and do a little tweaking to get a patent. And Lipitor is an excellent drug, and then they start competing by going to the HMOs and the wholesalers and saying, look, you convert my guy here, I'll give you a few bucks, or we'll sell it to you a little cheaper, or we'll do a bundle deal for you, we'll give you some free Imitrex or something. I know what goes on.
I got to bring you back to the question. How should DTC ads change?
Stop. Keep in mind, one of the things you can do in your ads, and I like the ad which was talked about, where you can talk about why your drug is better. Lipitor is better than Baycol. Ain't no question about it. I can use the vernacular. But you're afraid to tell people that. And you're afraid to tell them why it's better because Baycol's got a worse adverse event profile. And it's a very good drug, Baycol. Not Baycol, Lipitor. And the point I'm making is one of the things that could go on in the industry that would be useful is to really test the consumer's knowledge by saying, look, we think we got a better product than that product. It may be a little more expensive, but you very seldom see any of that.
John, anything from the research that you would point to as areas needing immediate fixing?
No, but I would.
You have something else? Go ahead.
I
Bring.
touch that question because I don't want to suggest policy, but I think there's a benchmark to be used. And the benchmark is if you ask physicians, has DTC had a positive or negative effect on your patients in practice? Roughly, you get about 40% saying it's had a very positive or somewhat positive effect on that. And I think the industry has to decide, and both sides of this table have to decide whether or not that's an acceptable performance level. And I think I'm not taking sides on this, but I'm saying 5 years ago, what would you have expected the answer to be? Now, some of you would say, I expected 0% of physicians to say that that is a good thing. Other people would say, hey, we got 40% saying it's having a positive effect, and that's how physicians are viewing it. I think that's the challenge going forward, is how do you move that up so that physicians feel that DTC is having a positive effect on their patients and practice. I don't know whether 40% is good or bad, but I'm just suggesting that to you as you think through what to change. That might be a metric.
Well, 59% in that survey, I think that was an FDA survey, said the contrary. But look, dealing with this DTC question is like trying to pick up mercury. It's so calibrated. For instance, let's say you accept the thesis that on a number of occasions, unquantified, because who could know, it does alert people to certain suspicions that they might have alleviated by going and getting a good diagnosis. It turns out that they have high blood pressure, they have diabetes. On the other hand, we know there's another problem that's hard to quantify. Over-medication, keep taking your drugs longer than the doctor would advise you to because there's inadequate physician monitoring, if we can ever get it that close, or overdose. So this is a funny kind of debate because in most debates, you have sort of clear pro, con. This one has all kinds of slippery intangibles that haven't been quantified. And how do you deal with that? All right, let's accept it. There are people every day who suddenly go to the doctor off an ad and they're diagnosed with something. Are they overdosed? Are they over-medicated? Let's at least incorporate those two phenomena into evaluating how the ads can be made better, how they can have different emphasis in the area of disease awareness, how the pharmaceutical industry can put inserts in that are real educational inserts, not lathered and garnished with all kinds of drug promotions as well. So how they can deal with, educational groups to try to get education in the schools. In other words, even if there are hard edges, which I believe there are to DTC, you can compensate for it by doing a lot more pro bono work toward the overall objective of having smarter, more alert consumers and more informed and less conflicted of interest physicians. I think we need to reduce the marketing of drugs with the marketing tool known as conflict of interest.
We're going to go to a comment from Jim Davidson, and then we'll take a few questions from the floor. So if you've got one, come to a microphone now.
I mean, it's easy to get into a battle of public opinion surveys, but I do want to go back to a point that both Ralph and John made on the survey that FDA did of physicians. It's very important to understand this, and I admit I had the same view that both of them just expressed, that roughly 59% of the physicians surveyed didn't think it contributed, DTC advertising contributed positively to the relationship. Now, what happened was Kid Aiken, who did that survey, asked that question flat with no backup, no offered suggestions. Did you think it helped in this area or that area? And in response to a flat yes or no, it came up with a 59%. But then she went back with specific questions. And listen to these results, because, I mean, they're dramatically different if you give some context to the question. 80% of those physicians' questions felt that DTC advertising made patients more aware of health problems earlier. 89% said it made the patients aware of possible treatments. 89% agreed that it made patients more involved in their health care, and 85% felt their patients were more likely to use the prescription properly because they saw these ads. Now, those are the details that it's important to focus on, as well as the blank across the board question.
Somebody here, I think you guys said that Ad Age was a good operation or something. Well, they said on January 14th of 2003, 47% of doctors feel pressured by DTC. Only 3% feel such a promotion have a very positive effect. Now that's Ad Age. That's your guys.
All right. I think we have a question in the back. Gentleman there with